Happy Monday, everyone. Hope everyone out there enjoyed your weekend. We've been under this omega blocking pattern for the last several days. These two areas of low pressure, one that's highlighted across Arizona that's actually bringing in some chilly like conditions. And then another piece of energy, which is another area of low pressure highlighted over Kentucky. But in the middle, we've had more of a dry slot across the central plains and warmth across the top. Now that's actually going to be on the move as it starts to break down over the next several days. But these troughs have been fairly significant. In fact, bringing some much cooler conditions for much of the southwest regions and also for areas across Kentucky. We had some overnight lows that dropped pretty low across the weekend. Now that's going to be on the move, and as it does, it's going to be bringing spokes of energy across the plains, especially there into Texas, getting going actually this afternoon with an increased enhancement as we get into the overnight hours. But look at all the chillier air, right? I mean, that's some pretty pleasant May-like temperatures and much cooler than what you would typically see, especially for those areas across Vegas, getting into the Phoenix region. I mean, Phoenix is going to be hard-pressed to even reaching 70 degrees today. That's how cool it is. But it quickly, I can show you, it quickly, rapidly rebounds in a big way, especially as we hit the weekend. But here is the overall setup this morning, and these are these two spokes of energy. This one is highlighted across Kentucky, back into Illinois, as well as into Indiana and Ohio. That's also bringing their piece of energy. And on the wraparound and pulling in from the Atlantic, we are going to be seeing some severe storms across areas of the Northeast later on this afternoon. And of course, our main setup is our upper level low that's just been kind of hanging out there for days, actually. That's actually going to be on the move. And as it does, it's going to be sending out these pulses of energy, these little short waves out ahead of it. And that's going to be kicking off kind of rounds of showers and thunderstorms. In fact, heavier rains and even flood watches are now in effect for a good part of New Mexico, where they definitely need the rain, back into the Texas Panhandle, for a good part of Oklahoma, North Texas, back into East Texas, and those areas across Louisiana, back into Arizona. They could be looking at some extensive flooding, especially the areas into East Texas, into Louisiana, back into portions of Mississippi. This will likely get extended as we get deeper, closer to this event over the next 48 hours. But we're still hanging on to winter for, say, across the mountain regions. It's still snowing fairly nice in some of these mountain ranges, and even in portions of New Mexico is going to be picking up some pretty nice snowfall, of course up above about 9,000 feet there. But overall, this is the setup from the Weather Prediction Center. We are expecting a lot of rain to kind of get going later on this afternoon, especially in the evening hours, as we get to see isolated supercells start to bubble up. So expect heavier rains to start forming there into West Texas. That will move along throughout the day into Central Texas. There's also another piece of energy that's highlighted across the Northeast, and they're going to be getting some heavier rains across New York, getting into areas of Long Island, back into Massachusetts, areas into Rhode Island, as well as into Connecticut. And then there's the severe risk as we get going today. So we are going to be sending spokes of energy across the central U.S. into North Texas this afternoon. And then as we hit the nighttime hours, especially towards that midnight time frame, this area is really going to start to blow up across the dry line out here in West Texas, as that upper level low will finally kind of be on the move. Those could actually turn severe, and in fact, an upgraded, enhanced risk. We could be looking at some very large hail producers, up to tennis ball size hail, and a couple of tornadoes. This is likely after the midnight in the wee hours of the morning, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. And this will move along and form a pretty significant MCS as well, with some even bow segments at times, getting some higher wind gusts of 60, 70 miles an hour is definitely not out of the question. And that will be on the move into the overnight hours. And of course, we have this piece of energy that's highlighted with our secondary piece of trough up here across the areas of the Northeast. And this will be having its own effect with some marginally induced hail and some stronger wind gusts, but definitely some heavier rains up here into Pennsylvania, back into Pittsburgh region, into West Virginia. And that will sneak down into Virginia as well as into North Carolina. And we also have some action there into Florida. But looking at the overall helicity values, this is where the areas will be likely rotating pretty elevated across areas Midland back into the Odessa region. We are expecting a couple of tornadoes possible in the overnight hours, those in far west Texas, and that will form that MCS. And on the leading edge of that, that will likely be rotating. So even further south into central Texas, southeast Texas, probably south of North Texas, south of I-30 corridor, definitely be on high alert for tornadic spin-ups. A couple of tornadoes is definitely not out of the question. And even further away into areas of Louisiana, I don't think we have to worry about tornadoes too much up here across Pennsylvania and upstate New York. It's mainly going to be a wind and hail threat and a heavy rain threat for you guys up there. But the main setup will be not only the severe storms on Tuesday, but the heavier and the flash flooding rains. That's why we have the flash flood watch in effect. So for those areas into green, we're looking up to possibly up to an inch of rainfall. That includes you guys up there into the northeast. But once you get into the yellow region, that's where we could be seeing more significant flooding, likely 1 to 3 inches, even some isolated parts. That includes North Texas, much of Oklahoma, into the Tulsa region, back into southeast Texas towards Houston. But once we get east of Highway 75 there into East Texas towards Tyler, Longview, especially like Shreveport, yeah, we could be looking at 2 to 4 inches. And there are some signs it could slow down once it hits Louisiana and back into Mississippi. And these flood watches are easily going to be extended, because I'm looking at some of the latest short range guidance. It's hitting at some pretty significant flooding events occurring potentially over Louisiana and portions of Mississippi. But the setup looks like this. Of course, you got the green, that is your kind of light rain. You back into the yellow area, that is your light to moderate rain, and that's covering much of, say, Vegas into Arizona. Yes, you could be looking at some much needed rain showers for your neck of the woods, and that sneaks through New Mexico, but it really gets going with those deeper, darker reds, especially there in the purples, with an MCS likely trying to form into the overnight hours, and that will propagate across areas of Texas and highlight a good chunk of Texas as well. The north, central, and even the southern portions of Texas will likely get under the action. And then once we swing into tomorrow, that will even reamp even further into from the overnight hours into the daytime tomorrow. And then once we get towards nightfall, getting into Louisiana and especially Mississippi, we could be looking at some serious flooding potentials up here for, getting into that over the next 48 hours. So here's your overall, latest high resolution guidance is kind of hinting at some of the higher rainfall totals. There it is across the Four Corners regions. But once we get into New Mexico, southeastern portions of Colorado there, a couple of inches of rainfall across the panhandle, and then you can see definitely widespread heavier rains with a good 1 to 2, possibly up to 3 inches. And then of course you got the isolated areas where they do in fact have that moderate risk for excessive flash flooding, and those flood watches in effect 2 to 4, even some isolated 6-inch totals. But once you get into Louisiana, Mississippi, we could be looking at more significant flooding, 6, 8, 10. Some double-digit returns are coming back in the picture from some of these isolated, high resolution guidances. And then of course up here where they actually kind of desperately need the rain, especially along the coastal regions, they'll be getting their fair share of the heavier rain as well over the next 48 hours, a good 1 to 2, possibly up to 3 inches in areas for these areas across the Northeast, back into the Mid-Atlantic, and the spokes of energy will be swinging across areas of Ohio and back into Pennsylvania as well. But if you kind of zoom in some of the high resolution guidance, this is what we're kind of talking about, back into Louisiana, back towards the northern portions of Louisiana, back into southern Mississippi, we could be looking at some serious, significant flooding. It's always concerning this close in. Within 48 hours, we're printing some double-digit totals in some isolated spots. So this, we could be looking at some, serious flash flooding. So definitely be on high alert and take all warnings necessary, and don't drive across the road that you definitely can't see the bottom. But once we get past Tuesday, I think Wednesday's more of a reset day, if you will. It's going to be nice for a good part of the country as it starts to dry out again, as things start to settle down after the big event coming up on Tuesday. I think Wednesday is going to be one of the nicer days of the week, especially for your work week. But that upper level low really hasn't gone anywhere, and it's going to be slowly making its move. And this is what's going to be adding some more insult to injury back here into the areas of Oklahoma, portions of Missouri, back into Arkansas, and of course portions of Texas and Louisiana again. They could be looking at more rain, complements of this upper level low that's just kind of taking its sweet time moving across. But look what happens on the backside. We're not talking about cooler air anymore for the areas of the Southwest. Those heat up very quickly. And in fact, you go right soar through the 80s, you soar through the 90s, and you actually get back into the triple digits for your weekend down here into the southwest. But there's your setup for Thursday. There's your piece of energy. That upper level low will be swinging across the panhandle. And if you're near that low, you're going to be under the gun for showers and thunderstorms as they kind of bubble up in the heat of the afternoon. This will be taking its kind of sweet time moving across the country, and as it does, it's going to ring out some precipitation along with it for Oklahoma, for Arkansas, back into Louisiana, a good part of the southeast as well. This low up here will slowly start to kind of wind down, if you will, and then it resets again. So yeah, this is May. You're going into your wettest month of the year, and this is exactly what's unfolding. There's a wet time ahead, especially with the more active subtropical jet stream and these areas of low pressure that just take their sweet time moving across. It's going to be laying down some fair amounts of rainfall over the next couple of days, and we're going to heat up in a big way. So these are temperatures going into your upcoming weekend, and yeah, where you're going to be hard pressed to be getting 70 degrees down there in Phoenix. You're going to be triple digits by the time we head into your Saturday time frame, when we're talking some record high temperatures potentially out west as you really start to heat up big time across Nevada into Idaho. We're going to be in the low 90s. But look where else in the good part of the country. You're going to be experiencing some nice weather well into the 70s, if not low 80s, but really nice conditions. The cooler game in town is up here into the Northeast. And I think for your Mother's Day, everybody wants to know what's happening for Mother's Day, if it's going to be nice or not. It actually is for a good part of the country. I feel like, yes, we got triple digits for the Southwest, but everywhere else is still experiencing pretty pleasant light conditions. Definitely some higher than average returns coming back into Montana, back into the Dakotas, through Nebraska, but it's still only in the low 80s. And then, of course, further south as well, we got widespread 70s. So nothing like off the charts by any stretch of the imaginations. And then overall, as far as your precipitation goes, it's not much, right? You can argue Wednesday and Sunday are likely going to be your two nicest days for this upcoming week. So definitely something to look forward to after we have a pretty volatile start to the first part of the week. And then it ramps back up again for Thursday and Friday. Then it kind of settles back down again for your weekend, and especially into Mother's Day. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video. Definitely hit the subscribe button and catch my next update. Wire protects you before and after the storm.